tomorrow. But back to a topic this morning is all about the public opinion polling, which has become an essential tool in public policy decision-making, election campaigns and media reporting. Among others, politicians and policymakers want to know citizens' satisfaction with service delivery, their perceived national priorities, their political preferences and their attitudes on the state of economy. Now, because polling exerts tremendous impact on politics and public policy debates, it is important that those who undertake polls exercise due diligence and conform to minimum professional ethics and practices. Not only do polls affect public policy debate, but they also serve as one of the more significant communication links between government and the governed. There is also a huge debate on whether polling undermines the democratic process by influencing electoral behavior and election results. And that's what we're discussing this morning. And of course, a tender reminder also on the question that we're asking you this morning. Do you think polls in any way undermine democracy by influencing election behavior and results? Do you think polls in any way undermine democracy by influencing election behavior and results? Hit us on Twitter. AMLiveNTV is a Twitter handle. AMLiveNTV is a profile name on Facebook. 20505 is our SMS portal. Also, we are streaming live on Facebook. Head over there so that you can also follow the conversation. And we want also to embark now, drilling deeper on that particular topic, the role of polls in politics. And we have on the lectern right now, Angela Ambitho. She is the CEO of Infotrak, to take us through this particular conversation and tell us more about the role of polls in politics. Right. Angela, you have 5 minutes beginning now. Just tell us, what are your sentiments? I have my card, yellow and red, to guide you also through the process. Take it away.
Thank you, Debarl. As I was driving here this morning, I went through in my mind all the conversations, different conversations I've had with different, types of people, from the watchman who opens the gate for me, from the person who helps me in my home, to the waiter who serves me in a restaurant, to the politicians who consume our information more than anybody can imagine, to the media who publish the polls that we, produce, to the doctors, to the lawyers, to the academia who wonder whether these polls really make a difference. And the question then for me was, are these polls really necessary? Am I wasting my time, the 7 or 10 years that I have actually been, participating in polls? Is it necessary? Is it worth the headache? And what is the purpose that these polls really serve? Who really needs to know what people think and feel about public affairs? What difference does it make? Does Wanjiku's voice really matter? And especially in an election year, where people are going to go out and vote anyway, why should we be spewing out polls to tell them what voting intention is? What difference does it make? Will it influence people? Will it make them vote less or more? And from different voices, the answers that I normally get on those questions is one: the pollster is a fraudster, is a con. They cook the numbers to suit the politicians who pay them. Who did the politicians, who did the pollsters talk to? Did they talk to you? Did they talk to someone you know? So who do they really talk to? And do these numbers represent, therefore, the views of the general public? Look at the crowds, the politicians would tell you. We're seething here with crowds. People love us. The ground is trembling beneath our feet. So how can these pollsters claim that we don't have a following? It's absolute rubbish. Then again, who owns those polling firms? The Jaluo pollster must be owned by the Jaluo politician. The Muzungu pollster must be working for a Muzungu country. The Kikuyu pollster will probably be working for a Kikuyu politician, because they can't be like doctors or lawyers, that they have a profession, and irrespective of their tribe, or where they come from, and who owns them, they will follow the science to the letter and ensure that they spew out the numbers as they are meant to. How can 1,000 people represent 40 million? How is that possible? It's absolute nonsense. These are juju people. These are sangomas. They go and sit somewhere and they just, concoct these things, and then they cause trouble. Look at Brexit. Look at the US elections. The pollsters were wrong. And those are pollsters who have been there for many more years than these ones here in Kenya purporting to be experts. So why should we trust them? The value of polls cannot be underestimated despite all these things we hear. Because as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of governance, apart from all the other ones. There's no other better. Opinion polling is perhaps the only way you can garner public opinion in a scientific manner, apart from all the other ones. And then leaders like Abraham Lincoln, so many years ago, said, what I need to know is what the people want done. And the question then is, the most important thing is to determine how. And that is how polling got its, the science started developing. And if you can trust the public, you can't trust the public with the polls, then you shouldn't trust them with the vote. If you can't trust them to think, to synthesize these questions, as many people say, then don't trust them when you talk to them to actually go out to vote. But indeed, government, media, social scientists, the church, citizens, academia, business, and politicians must recognize that understanding the pulse of the public, understanding what people think and feel, is one of those sacrosanct things in a democracy. You can't do without it. The polls act as an objective voice of the people, these people who are perceived normally, and I tend to call them the children of a lesser God. Those who can't speak for themselves, they can't walk to a governor's office, they can't walk to State House, they can't come to nation media. The opinion polls garners their views and consolidates them into the views of Kenyans and spews out that information to the stakeholders and decision makers so that they can pay attention. Now, do they influence negatively? Then we would also be saying media influences negatively, because media gives information. But I don't think that opinion polls influence negatively. Opinion polls inform, period. Now, how you then choose to use that information is based on your predisposition, how you have been cultured. What I do know, and has been proven, is that with the undecided vote, in the last minute, you would find cases where those undecided voters would determine how they would go based on where the numbers are larger. But in the onset, people just use those opinion polls to make their decisions. Is it a science? Of course it's a science, because we then use sampling to determine who we talk to. We don't talk to Debarl because we like Debarl. We talk to people based on a method, a scientific method that determines who it is that will be randomly sampled. And then we analyze the data using scientific, prescribed methods as well to ensure that these numbers are weighted to represent the general population. Are opinion polls necessary? Well, if you today left your home without looking in the mirror, and I postulate that opinion polls are like the mirror in your home, then they're not necessary. But if you, on the other hand, left your home and looked in the mirror because you wanted to know how you look before you go out so that you don't face shame, then opinion polls are definitely necessary. Thank you.
Ambitho, he is the CEO of Infotrak, of course, giving us salient points there on how pivotal the opinion polls are, right? What purpose does polls serve, right? We talk about also pollsters. Are pollsters fraudsters? And the value of people cannot be undermined, of the values of people. Do opinion polls influence negatively? Right, we shall be discussing this also much later in the course of the program. But we want to see the interface between the pollsters also and media. Do we just spew what they're saying, or we critically analyze also what comes from the opinion polls and researchers? Of course, we call them the pollsters. And we want to hear from Victor Bwire, who is the Deputy CEO of Media Council of Kenya. He'll walk to the podium right now to tell us more about this. Right, and I thought we'll actually, yes, thank you very much. You should talk to us and tell us more about the interface between researchers, the pollsters, and media. Where do media really come in? Do we just give what they've given us, or we critically analyze this? You have 5 minutes beginning now.
Thank you. One, opinion polls and other researchers play a critical role, both as information providers, both for media and the general public. That's not in question, I mean, in doubt. But two, that for us in the media, we advise, and there are guidelines for dealing with polls, and if you are covering them as a story, what are the guidelines? So one of the key things is that you must distinguish between the pollster's interpretation and the findings, so that media can do their own interpretations of the findings, not necessarily to follow what the pollsters have interpreted. So that distinction must be made. Two, there's the act, the famous Boni-Halwale Act, the publication of election polls 2012, and which gives guides on how polls should be treated in terms of coverage. So again, we request, all the time we remind media to be aware. In the guidelines for elections reporting that have just been released by Media Council, again, the expectation is that media, when reporting opinion polls, must be guided by the 13 points. And we'll look at the 13 points later, where Angela has already mentioned some of them, but obviously the issues of where, who, when, who commissioned, for what purpose, the issue of geographical location, I mean, respondents. There are the 13 questions, we call them the 13 questions, that must be, fulfilled as a journalist. Then obviously now we are requesting journalists or media generally that there are rules within the Boni-Halwale Act. 5 days to elections, you don't use those polls. Then obviously the issue of the credibility issue, reliability, credibility of those polls, that we need also to understand, like Angela mentioned, who are behind some of these things. It's very important, not necessarily because of tribal or whatever, but in terms of how reliable. Because 2013, and there are lessons we learned in 2013 where we had almost everybody sponsoring an opinion poll, and that then diluted in terms of how people then view opinion poll. 3, when we look at opinion poll only in terms of political, because opinion polls are done even for businesses, for other things. So, but when we limit it to just purely only on political, I mean, then we also miss the whole point. So we need also to look at opinion polls as a whole industry, a whole profession that has guidelines. There's the World Association of Opinion Polls. So there are international guidelines that. So for media respects opinion polls as an important thing, but the question, obviously, because of the environment in which we live in, we must be appreciate this diversity and unity. I mean, we are Luyas, we are Kikuyus, we are Luos, and many times. So even opinion polls, I mean, the pollsters must also be aware of some of these realities. So that's how we are, right? But we feel and we recognize that opinion polls play a very important role in both democratization processes and the rest. In fact, in one of the discussions with the media has been, can media as a team commission an opinion poll in some of these things? And we have been looking at possibilities of bringing all the media players to commission a joint opinion poll that then we minimize these issues of credibility and reliability. And so that I'm aware, for example, Radio Africa Group commissions their own opinion poll from some of these known companies. Now, so we are encouraging that, and other countries have done it. I mean, in Central Africa and the rest. So for us to appreciate the role of opinion poll, for example, and raise the credibility and reliability, for example, start thinking about, for example, a joint commissioning of an opinion poll by all media, which then. So to us, that's how we look at it. We encourage it. But also caution that there are also those who are doing business. I mean, they are purely briefcase opinion poll that will tell you all manner of things. The other issue we have been concerned about is, and she mentioned it, is the issue of questions. Some of the content of what are the questions that are asked. Aware that in this country, even outside opinion polls, even other researchers, you go to the universities and other people are complaining about, we now have what is called commercial respondents. In some towns like Kisumu, Nyeri, you get them sitting anywhere, and they ask for money to fill in questionnaire. So it's also a form of, people have been meant to believe research has a lot of money. So when researchers go out, somebody just says, give me money, I'll fill for you a questionnaire. So sometimes the sincerity of the answers that we get, and aware that some of the polls use, for example, phones, you talk about the issue of reachability. I mean, there are areas like Mandera, for example, where sometimes even access to phones is a problem. So when we use phones, again, there are also those systematic biases, even in terms of how, and it's not limited to opinion polls, but by the time you are framing a question, sometimes you are this victor who have looked at things this way. So sometimes it even influences the way you set up your question. So we are aware, and those are weaknesses. That's why opinion polls will give those margins of error and the rest. So to us, we encourage it, but we need to be cautious. We need to also encourage our opinion polls, pollsters to be more cautious in the manner in which they are dealing with some of these things given our environment. Thank you.
Who is the Deputy CEO of, is the Deputy CEO of Media Council of Kenya. And right now we're going to hear from Dr. Wale Akinyemi. Dr. Wale Akinyemi, he is the CEO of Powertalks, and also is an expert on demography and social statistics. To just tell us also how credible the opinion polls are. Dr. Wale, you have 5 minutes beginning now.
Thank you very much. Let's first look at the usefulness of polls. And because I think we're a little bit limited in the way we view polls. Polls are used for more things than politics. You have a logo, for instance. You want to test your logo. You want to find out how receptive will people be to this logo. Then you can commission a poll. You have a tagline. You want to find out how effective is this tagline in reaching people. You have a poll. But unfortunately, most people limit it to politics, and that's where the trouble comes. Now, let me look at the poll itself and see how we can have truly credible polls. There are a couple of things you need to look at. Number one, how representative is the sample? That's something that, like the speaker before me said, there are some places where you can't get to. But the truth is, you can always, when you have a pot of soup, this is the way we say it in Nigeria, you have a pot of soup. You don't need to drink the whole thing to know if there's enough salt. You just take a little. Now, that teaspoon that you take is the sample. All right? But it must be representative, because you find out that in that teaspoon of soup that you take, it has everything that is in the rest of the soup. So it's very important we ensure that our samples are very, very representative. Another thing that can affect the outcome of a poll is how the questions are framed. And this is very, very important. For instance, let's look at, in politics, you have candidate X and you have candidate Y. And you ask a question like, what chance does X have against Y? Now, that question is already biased, because it's already suggesting that Y is a better candidate, is a better placed candidate. So when you say, unless that was what you specifically wanted to find out, but when you say, what chance does Wale have against Angela? Now, what you have basically said in a subtle way is that Angela is the person to watch, Wale is the underdog. That sends a subtle message. All right? So we need to be very, very careful how those questions are framed and make sure that they are absolutely objective. Because some of these questions, if they're not objective, then they can lead on. When people hear it and say, oh, wow, so this is the person, and they look at the researcher, they look at you and they feel you have some information. So when you say, what chance does Wale have against Angela? That means you must have some information where Angela is concerned. And that is what determines a lot of times how the answers come. And that is where we have had credibility issues. Because the truth is, you don't need to cook numbers to get a poll to go in a certain direction. If you just ask, you can intelligently frame your questions for the answers to support the person you want to support. So that's very, very, very important. So when framing those questions, that's cool. Very, very crucial. And then we need to keep it simple and easy to understand. That, you see, I have been, I've seen places where you're doing a poll and the people don't understand what you have put there. And I saw this. Person doesn't understand and says, what is it? And the person they ask, just write anything. Now, why? Because when you don't understand it, when you've made it too complicated and your respondent doesn't understand it, he will have to look for help, all right? And that way, you will not get something that is very accurate. And then finally, the timing of the poll is very important. For instance, if the person has just done something great, something fantastic, and you ask a question immediately after that, there is likely to be more support in favor of that person simply because of the time factor. And so another way you can influence polls without cooking numbers, and this is so important, you need to know that you can influence the outcome of a poll without cooking the number. Another way is, for instance, I'm going to have a poll, we're going to have a poll in 2 weeks' time, and then we prep the candidate to be on the news between now and the day we're going to do the poll. Get the candidate to be on the news, create a buzz around that candidate. Now, what you will have when you do that poll, you will have results that have been influenced by the buzz that you have created. All right? So that's why I'm saying we don't have to cook numbers for polls to be biased. So maybe what my colleague said earlier on about the Media Council setting up a poll infrastructure that can look at all these things, maybe we need to look in that direction. Thank you very much indeed.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wale, for that, of course, expert analysis also on how opinion polls should be framed. And we'll drill deeper on this much, much later also, or even now, as we continue with the conversation. And we want also you to chime in. You can hit us on Twitter. AM Live NTV is a Twitter handle. AM Live NTV is a profile name on Facebook, and 20505 our SMS portal. We want now to really talk about this. You can also call in, ask your questions, or share your contribution as well. All right, let's drill deeper and see what you have to say on this. We'll begin with you, Victor, because you mentioned the Boni Halale Act. And there has been a debate out there. Wale has talked about timing as well. And we know you said it's mentioned, it is actually 5 days to the...
I mean, to the general election.
To the general election. Yeah. Is it 4 or is it 5? Because I think there's no, it's 5 days.
It's 5 days, that's what I have. Maybe somebody might have written, but it's 5. Yeah.
But what is, because there has been a debate on this, because if we look across the developed countries, they always say it is very key, maybe to also give an opinion call on the eve of the election. Why did we see it fit here as a country to have the opinion poll 5 days before the general election?
Thank you. Remember what you mentioned, and the discussion at hand is the influence. The influence. The influence. And remember the law, and like my brother said, most of these laws are made as a spur of the moment. They react. And when you look at even how that the Boni Halale Act was passed, there were too many opinion polls at that time, and nobody knew now which one. Plus, that's how people say it. Parliamentarians quickly went to Parliament and put up that publication. Actually, it's called Publication of Elections. It's even limited. Electoral opinion poll.
Yes.
So that because it was reacting to something, and there was a feeling at that time that each of the parties was sponsoring an opinion poll, and everybody was declaring their candidate to be leading. So we needed some sanity and order in this industry. That's how that law came. Even if you look at the name, it's very specific. But again, like you're saying, they have a huge perception and influence on how people vote. Now, our level of democracy might not be as other countries because most of, again, we are reacting to a situation. Kenya has a unique situation it's reacting to. And remember, at that time, too much of 2007, 2008 was hanging on everybody's mind. Everybody thinks, what is it that we did wrongly that then led to that? So again, that was the environment in which that law came in. So it was reacting to a situation. Maybe as we grow as a country in terms of our culture, in terms of our democratic principles and practices, we might remove reduce the days to 1 or 2. But as it is now, remember again, in terms of our media ownership structures, where quite a big chunk of our media are owned by the same politicians who have a lot of interest, then when one uses an opinion poll a day to, and they decide whichever way they want to lead the story with, then obviously it will have. I heard 2 weeks ago when one of them came and everybody was working with that headline with a newspaper cutting of the opinion poll. And it's a huge campaign poll. I can tell you, I saw even in political rallies, somebody say, you can see how I'm firing on. So that was the reaction, cautiously, that we don't want a situation where maybe and remember what I said again, most of our media stations, not necessarily the big, those established ones, they have the capacity to interpret, they have people they can invite to help interpret those things. But in many of our other stations, sometimes it's what we call a pipeline. They pick and just reproduce in terms of, so that's what we're saying, if it's like a campaigning, on an even a day, and you are saying an opinion poll has said Victor is leading, that obviously then has a lot of influence. That's why we gave that period of 5 days to. Yeah. But again, these laws are made in an environment they can be changed depending on what is good for the country.
I just want to add on to what Victor, this law that Bonnie, took to Parliament and was enacted, is something that we as a research association worked on with him. So it's not like we were against it. We sat down with Bonnie. His initial, bill was wishy-washy. So we sat down with him. It was my first time meeting the bullfighter. But we then now have become friends. And we said, this is what we as the experts, the technical people, would like included in this law. Because it looks at 2 things. It looks at the content of the opinion poll, but more importantly, the publishing of that poll. Onus of which lies not so much with the pollster, but with the media owner. Because what tends to happen, Debarl, and you probably have attended some of our releases, is that many of the pollsters, we're not many anyway, we're only 3 big pollsters. The big three follow the tenets of polling to the letter. So that if you come for our briefing sessions, the first 15 minutes is on methodology. But it's boring because we talk about when it was done, who did you talk to, what informed the sampling frame.
Boring but important.
What questions were asked, how were those questions asked, what is the margin of error, what does margin of error mean. 15 minutes we take on that. Walai, it's always done. And then we go into the nitty-gritty of releasing the poll. So we ourselves sometimes, when we see the headlines, we get shocked. Only this year, we saw one of our polls being reported by your media house correctly. Kenya is headed in the wrong direction. Another media house, same day, Kenya is headed in the right direction. So one said Kenya is headed in the wrong direction, that was Nation. And another newspaper, headline, Kenya is headed in the right direction. You can imagine what that does, one, to the media owners who themselves were, I remember someone from Nation calling me and saying, what have you done? You released 2 polls, but we do this, the media release to everyone at the same time.
Yes.
So it really is dependent on what your predisposition is as a journalist as well. What do you want to see? The other thing is that, as we release these things, there are those protocols indeed that we have to follow. They're globally and internationally stipulated protocols, and those were the protocols that we then prescribed and gave to Bonnie Lale to include in the Act.
Yes.
So this Act is not something that we as members of the Market Research Association of Kenya are averse to. We contributed to it. And in the, the window, which is now 5 days, very different from what the global standards are. And we gave him the standards. We said in France, it's, I think, more than 5 days. In other developed, nations, democracies, there is really no stipulation. You can determine it yourself. So the day before is also done. But because we knew that, one, polling is a young science in Kenya, polling was going under too much scrutiny in this country. Although it is the most vibrant in Africa, need I say, that polling in Africa is biggest in Kenya. We are the leaders. We are called to do polls in Nigeria. We're called to do polls in Ghana. We were called to do polls in Tanzania because we have set the pace. And those countries trust us. But what I'm trying to say is that that window, which was 5 days, and that which was enacted as 5 days, we as the MSRA have signed a document. We have signed on a dotted line, all the pollsters, that we will respect a 14-day window. So you will not see a poll from any of the pollsters who belong to this respected association within a 14-day window.
What happens to those who don't belong to that and respect that?
Then they will now themselves, because they don't belong to, and what we have said is that this particular memorandum is meant to be shared with the media owners.
Okay, let's say from Dr. Wale, because also he mentioned also the way the opinion, especially the statement, how you choose a statement, because we hear a question will be thrown like, do you think the election was honest? And I think that's a very open-ended question, right? The choice of statement, because I think you can actually also break it down to what really constitutes honesty or dishonesty, because that we are not given by the pollsters in the first place. So how pivotal is it when we choose? And you think
Sorry,
also...
what are we not given by the pollsters?
What we are not given also the metrics of maybe, or what really constitutes dishonesty? Because it's just a question. Do you think the general election or the election was honest? But what constitutes honesty? We don't know. Dr. Wale, you want to respond to this?
Yeah,
choice of statement, how key is it?
It's crucial because, but you see, the exposed ones, the big three.
That's according to Angela's ratings.
My bias, but honest view.
You know, my friends. There are internationally accepted ways of doing this. But the point I'm making is that what stops you is not whatever is going on around you. What is going to stop you is your personal value as a pollster. At the end of the day, that is the most important thing. I give you an example. I have a son who's studied information systems and technology, and he said one of the things he learned is ethical hacking. I said, what? I said, so you can hack into things? He said, yeah. It's part of the... I said, so what stops you from hacking into things? He said, my values. And that's exactly the way it is with pollsters. Because, listen, let me give you an example. I don't want to use any names here, but let's imagine one politician is John, the other politician is Bill. Now, John has commissioned me to do this, okay? Then, my question, like I said earlier, my question is, what chance does Bill stand against John? Now, it sounds very innocent and very subtle. But you know what I have done? I have already planted a seed in the mind of my respondent that John is the person to beat. So you say, how important is the way we frame these things? I think it is everything. If you get the questions right, then we will get the right result. Then another thing, you know, let me point out this. Another thing is that even when you have the right result, the interpretation of that result by the media
is also important.
Well, the media is also important.
Yes, because you can report it to suit your bias. For instance, so John has been seen to have 58% and Bill, has 42%. Okay?
Yes.
Then you report it and say something like, Bill robbed of, or Bill, there's a way you can report it.
Bill's popularity growing.
Yes, Bill's popularity
20 to 42%.
growing.
Yeah.
So what you have done, even though Bill is the one that's got a lower mark, but what you have inadvertently done is to also plant that seed in the minds of people that Bill is growing. That's the guy to watch.
All right. We have James hanging on the line before we continue the conversation. I think he has a contribution or a question. Good morning. You're on the line, James. Good morning. James, good morning. From Kakamega. Hello, good morning, James. All right. We'll get back to James. I think he's... that particular line here has been disconnected, but we'll get through to him. Right. But opinion polls and epistemic correspondence, especially from the studies that you are actually conducting, do we also have that taken care of when we go to, sample the opinions from people? And would you mind telling us what are some of these epistemic correspondence that you normally work with? And we can talk also of the multiple indexes. I think you, the expert on this also, Wale, you can help me on this. For also Angela to give us a clarity on this.
But before I answer your question, let me say that the reason why polling is indeed a science is because it goes through such rigmarole processes. And like Wale had mentioned when he gave his talk, is that this science is not limited to political polling. So that even when we are, and we do, determine who reads which newspaper the most, that science is the same. Questionnaire design, apart from everything else, is one of the most critical areas in determining that the science is done well. Yes. In fact, it is one of the hardest. That to get people who can actually frame questions properly is not something that everybody in your research company can do. This is why it goes through very rigorous processes in any research organization. The first stage is that someone drafts that question. And then different people will look at that question and determine the objectivity of that question.
So is it someone, one person, or there is a committee that maybe
it's a raft of people. So it can go through, it's almost like a writer will write a story. A reporter will write a story. Then an editor will look at that, a sub-editor will look at it, and an editor. So it goes through such rigorous processes that by the time that it is going to the field, it is not even ready yet. Because that question has to be piloted by the respondent. So that if the respondent, as Wale was saying, says, I don't know what you're saying, what does right mean, right direction mean, or whatever that other question you were asking before, if there is ambiguity in the question, that's a bad question. You go back to the drawing board. And the pilot is not done on one person, it's done on hundreds of people. And it is tested, so it comes back to the research agency, and the research agency then gets the feedback and says, how do we then tweak this to make it the most suitable question? Because one of the things that we are taught in Research 101, is if you have a biased question, you will have biased results. Right. So it's a no-brainer.
All right.
Any child of research
but
will tell you.
At the end of the day, we have to admit also we're human, right? We have also biases as well. Right? Yes. And okay, when we talk about values and the biases and the humanity of it.
The values, I think, come in, not in the area of following the protocol. So like when a doctor is looking at you, the first thing that is done is to look at your vitals. It's a no-brainer. It has to be done. That you have to go and your vitals are checked. Right. They get out your file. That is the same rigmarole or the same process that research goes through. Right. Now, where values comes in, and it is indeed very critical, is that Angela owns a company or is in charge of a company.
Right. I'm sorry to butt in, Angela, because we have James hanging on the line. Don't lose your track of thought. We have James on the line. Good morning, James from Kakamega. Hello, good morning, James.
Hello.
Good morning to you. You have a question or a contribution for us?
Yeah, I've got an opinion.
Yes, please. And do you mind, excuse me, do you mind just turning down on the volume of your television so that we can hear you clearly? Don't listen to your television.
Let me turn it down.
Please, yeah. Thank you. Just go full steam ahead with a question or contribution, please. James?
Hello.
Yeah, go on. We can hear you.
I would like to tell you that I'm following you up and I would like to...
Please contribute.
I'm congratulating you.
Thank you very much. Okay, question please, James. We're waiting. All right, maybe he's happy with the program. We have Nyabera hanging on the line. Thank you, James. We have Nyabera hanging on the line. Good morning, Nyabera.
Good morning, Debarl.
Morning to you. You have a question or a contribution?
Yeah, my contribution is
yes.
As far as polls are concerned.
Yes.
Maybe Angela can give us a clear way that they do their sampling.
Yes.
That is my first point.
Yes.
And the effects that taking a small sample, let's say we are citing Kenyan county towns.
Yes.
How far do they go to the rural areas? And what is the effect if they don't go to those rural areas? What is the effect that it can have in the polls?
Yes.
And then the way that Terry had said,
yes,
there are very simple questions that they put maybe in a given poll.
Yes.
Let's say, for example, one of the questions is between Raila and Uhuru, or between NASA and Jubilee. Yes. Who will you vote for?
Yes.
And to me, there must be a criteria on why we have to arrive in such a question, so that once you look the person you are interviewing,
yes,
what is the background information leading to me saying I'll vote for Jubilee, for example?
Yes.
This one will assist. I think there's something we call it will assist in knowing what type of person am I dealing with. Because, for example, I normally ask myself, like in Kitengela,
yes,
if whoever is said in Kitengela because it's where I stay, and he goes maybe to a stage like Naivas,
yes,
or he goes to a stage like Khan General, where we have laws in motorbikes, and that is where he's asking the question.
Yes.
Will it be a distribution per se of what the Kitengela people are saying? It will not be. It will be biased.
All right.
So what do they do in such scenarios? Do they just go to town?
Thank you.
Or do they go to the rural?
Thank you, Nyabera, there for calling from Kitengela. And Angela will answer that in a moment. Before you answer, Nyabera, could you also just finish on your track of thought? Then we'll hear also from Victor on the media houses. Can they also be commissioned to, can they be commissioned also, or can they be commissioned as a media house to carry out an opinion poll, right? But just finish on your thought.
I think what Wale said about values is very critical. And, I'll give you my own experience because I've been doing polling since 2007. And, when we sometimes, and we are faced with those situations where, people will come to you and say to you, listen, this thing is very critical to me. Can you do a poll that shows that we are going to, I am more popular than X? There, the decision that you make is based on your values. You have the option of taking the money and then tweaking those numbers. And you can tweak the numbers essentially using very rudimentary ways where you just change the number. you cook those numbers. Or you can tweak it based on more clever methods where you ask the question in a manner that it will influence the answer. And the reason why some of us come and sit here and can sit and talk here without fear of contradiction is because we always say, show us the politician who has paid us to tweak a poll. It's never happened. It's never happened? Because of our values. And do we make as much money as we could from those polls? For our company, opinion polling is a loss leader.
So you want to tell me
we don't make money from those
there has been no approach at all from any politician for you to commission maybe a poll for their region?
I am saying that happens all the time. There are two things. There's the politician who asks you to do a poll for their region and tells you, tell me as it is. That person you do work for. That is what opinion polls are indeed there for, in part. But then there is the other one who will call you and say, and this happened to me just the other day. I still have the documentation. We want this thing done. And you say, no problem. You want it for yourself. We only publish polls that we ourselves sponsor. We've always done that. But if you want a poll that is done for you, you can pay for it, just like Nation pays us to do research for them. Now, the person then says to you, but I would like you to just up my figures. I've known you such a long time. And my first question to them was, what are you asking me to do? Are you asking me to lie for you or to go against my values and principles? And that is a question you cannot ask me. And the person went quiet. Did we end up doing the poll for this person? Yes. Did it show that he was the least popular or not the most popular? Yes. But I think he learned his lesson from it because that was the only question I asked him. And this is a person I've known my whole working life.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Let's hear from Victor on the media house being commissioned to carry out opinion polls, or them carrying out their own opinion polls.
I mean, that would be an ideal situation, likable and welcome. The challenge is that they have the capacity to do internally their own research. That's why many of them would commission those established companies to help them, because it will be desirable. And that's why the idea we're talking about, the internal capacities for a media house to fulfill. Remember that it's a huge investment. It's not cheap. Two, do we have, I mean, even one or two media houses have a serious research department in this country. Many of our media houses do not have even a research department. So who would do it for them? Those poses challenges.
And why is it that we don't have any research departments?
That's
many of the media houses.
That was one of the weaknesses we have raised with the media many times. In fact, even during this time of an election, that why can't you have seriously? Because when people talk about media not reporting on this well, you have heard those questions. Yes. It's sometimes lack of depth in some of those issues. And as an investment, media houses need to start thinking seriously about serious research departments. Because when we have information that is not based on research, or we depend on others, then sometimes it limits. Because we are telling them that don't look for, distinguish between the pollsters' findings and interpretation and your own interpretation. That's why when you raise the issue of one media house saying wrong direction, the other one saying right direction, it's purely at the interpretation of the media houses who never sit together as one media in Kenya and agree on one headline. So sometimes those biases are there. They come, again, depending on which journalist was on duty, which media house has which policies.
Could it be also an issue, maybe, and we're strapped for time, but could it be an issue of maybe the way we train our journalists as well? It is really based on generalities, that we don't have any meaningful specifics. Yes, if we send a reporter, maybe, it should be bearing a background of maybe research, statistics, he studied statistics, or maybe it's a health symposium, we have a doctor going there. Is media also headed there? Because as it is right now, we are dwelling on generalities, no meaningful specifics?
Data journalism is the way to go, and you have seen many, even including Nation, here data journalism. Do we have journalists who can analyze data, make sense of it?
Yes.
And for example, when a pollster, they are releasing polls, why can, for example, Nation Media Group send the business desk or business daily and the business to go And obviously, because it has a political end, we always send our political reporters. But not necessarily that they can't have the capacity, but look at even the orientation. And, for example, right now, KTN has Dr. Masikorid, who is purely a doctor, who is now doing their health desk. So that's the way to go, specialization in journalism. People who understand about it, people increasingly must now start specializing in a particular where you are an authority. And that helps not only your media house, but even the people you are writing for. Get to understand. You have seen people like Jaindi Kisero, for example, in business. You want to read, Chengra Puru in business, you want to read because it's an area they understand, and even the interpretation and presentation of things is quite different. So we are encouraging media houses to seriously invest in this department. First, specialization must be encouraged. Two, further trainings, retraining of journalists, because things are changing. The emerging trends in the industry are changing, but when we are still stuck with a traditional media house, it becomes a challenge, and it's exposing some of our journalists to being ridiculed. Yet we have very bright, brilliant journalists, graduates of almost all universities. But because we don't allow, Victor is a graduate in health, but he's trying to cover politics, sometimes those are the journalists. So we need to invest, as a matter of fact, in research, especially research and specialization. Right.
We'll be remiss if you don't really answer what Nyabera asked. We have very few minutes remaining on methodology. How far do you go to the rural areas? And you talked, of course, of connectivity. When you're actually doing a straw poll, maybe, and you're using phones, how people who they don't have connectivity, network is down, or there's no pure connectivity, then how does that really pan out? Maybe we can hear from Dr. Wale, methodology that is being used, and briefly you'll also summarize on this, Angela.
I think let's look at the US. I think that's a society that's very advanced in this. Now, you had different polls, in the elections, you had different pollsters coming up with different results. Now, which is very interesting right there.
Yes.
Have you ever asked yourself, how come you have different polls coming up with different results? Okay? Now, I'm leading somewhere. But then you now have what they call, so you have the ABC do their poll, CNN do their poll, and then you now have what you call the poll of polls. Okay? Which kind of comes like an umbrella to cover, you know, a wider space. But why did the US polling system even get it wrong where Trump was concerned? Because all of them pointed towards Hillary. Very simple. Number one, why do we get it wrong sometimes? Assumptions. You know, and the sad thing is that we are entitled to make certain assumptions within certain contexts.
Yes.
Okay? But when we take the assumptions out of that context, then we have a wrong poll. Okay? Now, another thing is, like I said earlier, wrong questions. So, you ask the wrong questions, you get the results, they are accurate as per the questions you asked, but they are not the true representation of how people feel at that point in time because you didn't ask them the right questions. And then the third thing is the wrong samples.
Thank you. The wrong samples. I think we don't have really time to drill deeper. Angela, just briefly wind up on that.
One of the misnomers is the US pollsters got it wrong. They didn't get it wrong because they said Hillary would win the popular vote. She won the popular vote.
They didn't go for the college.
They didn't go for the college.
Yeah, I think that was the debate there.
So that is one thing we need to correct.
Yes.
But I think let's be fair to Nyabera because he asked a very critical question. Who do you talk to? How do you sample? What is the process of sampling? The process of sampling actually follows different steps. The first one is, who is your universe? Is it women? Is it women in Nairobi? Is it women in a specific ward in Nairobi? That then would inform what you call your universe and what you're going to look at in terms of who you're sampling. If it is, say, Kenya, then we know that 50% of our population is female.
Yes.
So then we'd look at it from that perspective to begin with and say, then if it is Kenya, we know that we are going to be talking to about 20 million women, or looking at that. Where do these women come from? What defines Kenya? Kenya can be defined in 8 regions, which is the former provinces, so you then have to cover that in your sampling. Or Kenya can also be defined in terms of the 47 counties. You then determine which one of the 2 you cover. Most of the researchers right now, because of the constraints in resources, cover the regions. Once you have done that, then you say, how are you going to then determine which parts of that particular province you cover? That is where the systematic random sampling comes in. So you just then don't choose Nakuru in Rift Valley because you want to. There's a process, randomizing process, that will inform you. Over and above that, we also do purposive sampling. Assuming your random sampling does not pick any place in South Rift, you then have to purposively say, I know that Rift Valley is constituted by North Rift, Central, and South Rift. So you then include that.
Thank you.
Then finally, he said, do you go to the bus stops? We don't go to the bus stops. In terms of picking whether it's going to be Wale or Debarl, there is a system that is used. We use the left-hand rule. So we pick a specific landmark in an area. So if you go to Kindagela, what is the landmark? Is it the market? And from there, the walk begins with the researchers. You are not allowed to interview someone in a catchment like a bus stop. The interviews are household interviews. And therefore, that is how we determine how the person is picked. And even in the household, I know you're running out of time. Even in the household, if there are 10 adults who are 18 and above, you don't pick the one who came to you and opened the door. You have to use what is called a Kish grid to determine who it is that you're going to talk to in that house.
Thank you.